Good morning. Before I start, I just want to say we didn't make enough order of service, so if you could share. I mean, look at the pews are just filled. I'm so happy. We got to start making more. Okay, welcome to the worship service of the First Unitarian Church of Hobart. My name is Barb Lango, and I participate in the life of the church by serving on the board of directors, among other things. The service today is being held by our new minister, Pastor Tom Bozeman. We are currently streaming our service online. The joys and sorrow portion of our service, however, is private, and we will take a break from streaming during that portion. The sermon will be available for future viewing on Facebook, YouTube, and the church website. Due to the high transmissibility of the latest COVID variant, we are asking that masks be worn in person attendings. If you do not have a mask, we could supply one for you. So now please take a deep breath and another, and join us in the spirit of reverence.
If you would, take this moment to help me light the chalice. Words should be in your programs. We gather this hour as people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together. Thank you.
Normally, if something goes wrong, I just sort of move forward, but the lighting of the flame seems important. These opening words from the book of Job, also reading number 424 in the back of our hymnals. Have you entered the storehouses of the snow? Or have you seen the treasures of the hail? From whose womb did the ice come forth? And who has given birth to the hoarfrost of heaven? The waters become hard like stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. I invite you to open your hymnals to hymn number 6, Just as Long as I Have Breath, and rise in body or spirit to join in song.
please remain standing and join me now in the affirmation of faith? The words are printed on the laminated handouts in the pews and in your order of service.
Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament. Service is its prayer. And this is our covenant. To dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Now it's time to greet your neighbors. We are striving to create a worship space which is both spiritual and safe. However, we recognize that not everyone can attend in person.
I'm glad to have you here. I'll give you one anytime.
I know.
Please be seated. So, something that a lot of Unitarian Universalist congregations do on Sunday mornings is share joys, concerns, milestones, things that are going on in your life these days with one another, and in sharing them, getting to hold them together as a larger body. So I'm happy to come out with the microphone to you, and you can speak whatever it is into the mic. Before you do so, please share your name with us so that we know who you are in case we don't. Any joys or sorrows or concerns or milestones?
I'm Joe Heaston.
Good morning. This morning's story is entitled "That Is Good" by Elisa Davy Pierman. Long ago in India, a king ruled the land. Always by his side was his minister, who was known for his wisdom, but also for a strange habit that often annoyed the king. For no matter what happened, he always responded by saying, "That is good, that is good." One day the king was out hunting when his horse was startled by a large snake. The king was thrown from the horse and dragged some distance in the process, deeply cutting his foot and losing a toe. As his minister knelt beside him to inspect the damage, he said, "That is good, that is good." "How can you say that is good?" the king screamed in outrage. "What kind of minister are you? You are dismissed from your post immediately." "That is good," said the minister, "that is good." And off he went to the palace to pack his bags. The king returned home, and his foot eventually healed, minus the toe. Again, one day he decided to go hunting. This time he became separated from his hunting party. Excuse me, I lost my place there. Suddenly he was ambushed by the tribal people who lived near those woods. He was tied up and taken back to their village. Now, these tribal people had a custom of sacrificing their prisoners, the king in this case, to their god. They prepared him for the sacrificial celebration, washing and decorating him. The celebration began with music and dancing as he was led to the slaughtering place like a goat. The king shook with terror from head to foot. He nearly fainted when the priest came forward, waving a long knife. The priest danced around him, inspecting him from every angle. Suddenly, he motioned for the music and dancing to stop. "This one is no good," he said. "He has been cut." He pointed to the missing toe. "We cannot sacrifice to God something that has already been cut." The priest slashed at the vines that bound the king's hands and legs and set him free. The king limped back to the palace as quickly as he could. Once back in the safety of his palace, the king remembered his minister and called for him. He told him the story and said, "You were right. It was good that my toe was lost. Because of it, I was not sacrificed by the tribal people. But why did you say this is good when I fired you from your post?" "There is always some good to come out of things, Your Highness," replied the minister. "If I had not been fired, I would have been with you that day when you were captured by the tribal people. Because I have all my toes, I would have been next in line for sacrifice." "You are truly right, my friend," said the king. "That was good. That was good indeed. And so is your wisdom. You shall advise me always." And he did, and it was good.
So we're going to be singing a hymn over the next few weeks, this week, next week, and then the following week of the series. It's number 1043 in your teal hymnals, and thankfully we've got some choir support in the song since it's a little bit newer for some folks in the congregation. And before we actually start singing, I want to talk through the pronunciation with everybody. There's a pronunciation key down on the bottom, and it can be helpful to just speak the words before we have to sing them. So thankfully, it repeats a number of words, so it makes it a little bit easier to make it through the whole thing. So if you look down in the bottom of that first page, you look at 1043, it has a pronunciation guide there. And the part in italics that's how it looks in the actual hymn. And then the part in regular type, that's kind of changed around a little bit to make it easier for most English speakers to read. So I'm going to say each line, and I'm going to invite you to repeat it back after me. So that first line there, hal heat aut seretet. Beautiful. And then the one after that, hal seretet aut beke. Perfect. And then hal beke aut aldash. And then hal aldash aut ishten. And then lastly, Hal Ishten Ot Suksheg Ninshen. Wonderful, wonderful. So the last line is a little bit trickier, but I trust that over the next few weeks as we practice this, it'll get easier and easier. And so now I invite you to rise and bow to your spirit, and we're going to get some support in singing this together.
Yes, also keep in mind there's two separate parts. So the first iteration of it, first verse will do the Transylvanian line, so the top line. The second verse will do the English part two. And on the third time we do this, we're going to sing both of them together. Yes. This side will do the Transylvanian part one, and Dick will lead the part in English.
I'm sorry, I'm backwards. You're leading part one, I'm leading part
Okay, sorry. Yeah. Okay, so Dick will lead part one and Maggie part two. That's only on the third time through. So the first time we sing the Transylvanian, the second time all together we sing some English. The third time through, we sing both together. It'll be clear. Wish us luck. Here we go, from the top.
Beautiful. Thank you for making that happen. So we'll get a couple more weeks of practice on that one. So thank you for making it happen this first time through. So we are in the second week of this series. I tend to do a 5-week series for worship services, and just broadly, this series and the next one are kind of linked. This one, August, early September, we'll be getting into reflection, self-examination, and then late September into October, more into setting intentions for the coming year, taking any actions to resolve what's lingering from the past year. And so just as a quick review of some of the things that we talked about last week, in our society, this sort of process of looking back and looking forward happens at the turning of the Gregorian calendar from one year to the next. In Judaism, there's a different mind frame, though, one that I think fits congregational life quite well. The time for such self-examination is when things are still warm, when there's still a lot of light, but gradually less and less. And so we're already headed toward the winter months, hence the opening reading from Job this morning. And of course, historically, the weather patterns that inspired this process were a bit different, a different part of the world. But for our purposes and our time and place, the fact that we're headed towards the cold months when we will huddle indoors, when the scope of our attention and awareness might naturally drift inward, and the fact that the congregational year is getting going again after a usually lighter summer season means that now is a good time for us to take account of our relationship with the world, with one another, and with ourselves. To settle up accounts before the natural world starts to feel less hospitable to us. And so indeed, many pagans and also Jews celebrate their New Year's in the fall, just as Jews consider the day to begin not at midnight, not at some arbitrary time on the clock, but rather at sunset, at the time when we take a break from having access to the life-giving energy of the sun. And so last week, as I typically do, as you'll see in worship services, I offer an invitation or assign homework, whichever metaphor you prefer. And last week, a couple questions. One of them was, how do you want to be remembered? And one of them was, what is most important? How do you want to be remembered? And what is most important? And so this week, we'll be getting into the first little bit of taking stock of our lives. So I got a car a number of years ago. As I moved to a new place, I've been going without a car for a number of years. I'd been living in the Bay Area, going to seminary. I just relied on public transportation. Then I moved out to the suburbs in Massachusetts, and I needed a car. And I got this 1999 Honda Civic, which got me around pretty well. It got decent gas mileage. And it was the first car that I had that had cruise control. It wasn't a really great cruise control because it was from 20 years ago or so it kind of kept approximately the same speed, but it was good enough. It was good enough, and I enjoyed just having the transportation to finally get around on my own. And then at some point, it was early in the wee hours of the morning, and I was in bed at the apartment in Quincy, Massachusetts, and there was this loud crash. And going out to investigate, one of the limbs on the tree had fallen onto my car and totaled it. It was no longer drivable. I mean, it was already an older car, so it doesn't take a lot to total one of those cars. But the car had been totaled. I wasn't able to use it. I needed to figure out some way to get to work. I had minimal insurance. I just had like the basic or what's required by law insurance on the car. So it's not like I was going to get a souped up response from my insurance company. And so I needed to get another car really quickly. And so I went out and I leased the car that I currently have and ended up buying a Honda Civic that is newer than that. So instead of a 99 Honda Civic, it's a 2017 Honda Civic. And it gets me around pretty well, and it has all these bells and whistles that I never would have thought to ask for. And one of the bells and whistles on there is it has a monitor that tells you when your tires are starting to get low on air. I'd never even known this was a thing before I got this car, but apparently it's a thing that I got with my car. And so at one point I was driving around with this new car and it went off. And I thought, oh, okay, well, I'll need to go and get my tires refilled. I went and got my tires refilled. And then a couple weeks later, literally maybe like a month after I got my car, I was driving around and just it handled kind of weird. I wasn't, like, it was driving in some way that was kind of funny, and I couldn't quite, like, it seemed like the road was especially rough, and I wasn't sure what the deal was. And thankfully, I knew there was a tire shop a little bit around there, and I thought I would just like go to the tire shop and see what was up. And I got to the tire shop, and I get out, and I go into the office, and I tell the guy, hey, I've got this thing going on, would you take a look at it? And he comes out, and I hadn't even looked at the side of the car to see what was going on. He comes out, and the tire is completely flat. I've been driving on it for like a mile, with just a completely flat tire. And what that told me was, oh, if I hadn't known that I had this indicator thing on my car, I might have known to get out and check myself. But I had placed full faith in this newfangled thing of my vehicle to tell me, and so I could just let that part of my mind go. And these days in our society, there is so much that is trying to grab our interest, that is trying to pull our thoughts and our attention each way, that it becomes easy to just offload things and not pay attention to things as we might normally. There are huge sectors of the economy that are based on trying to arrest our attention. It is easier than it has ever been in human history to not notice the parts of our lives that might be uncomfortable or going flat in some way. There's Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and Reddit and TikTok and YouTube. There's Disney Plus and Paramount Plus and HBO Max and Netflix and Hulu. There's 24-hour news networks and shopping channels and pizza delivery services. You can browse new lamps or sofas on Amazon at 3 a.m. There are so many things that pull us away from noticing what might be going on under the surface of our lives. The tire that might have gone flat a mile ago that we're still driving on. And so what do we miss out on? In a romantic partnership, maybe sweeping discord under the rug can result in gradually growing apart. At a job, ignoring an unhealthy dynamic can result in termination or toxicity. With friends, never dealing with dissatisfactions or frustrations can result in a degree of shallowness or superficiality. It's not to say that we're supposed to always just dwell on unhappy things, but if we're specifically avoiding thinking about something or feeling something or dealing with something, it's usually a healthful thing to take some time and acquaint ourselves with that, to unearth it, to turn it over and discover what's there for us. While many non-Jews have heard of the Jewish high holidays of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the weeks leading up to those holidays are less well known to the public. The overall arc of this time of year is one of teshuvah, of turning. And the high holidays are the climax of the experience, but Rabbi Alan Liu, from whom I'm borrowing the titles of every sermon in this series and also many of the signposts in the worship series, he's written about how the overall arc begins on the holiday of Tisha B'Av. And Tisha B'Av is Hebrew. Tisha means 9, and Av is the name of the month. So Tisha B'Av is the 9th day of the month of Av. And Tisha B'Av occurred on August 7th, so last Sunday, and so the first week of our series, but I didn't want to jump right into it because it's a theme that is somewhat tragic. As Rabbi Liu writes, Tisha B'Av is a day associated with the various calamities that have befallen the Jewish people since the earliest days of their history, particularly the destruction of the 2 great temples of Jerusalem. The first temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians on the 9th day of the month of Av, and the second temple was destroyed by the Romans on the same date in the year 70 of the Common Era. The great temple of Jerusalem was the navel of the universe, the earthly locus where Israel felt its connection to the divine presence in a palpable way. So Tisha B'Av is primarily about the loss of this connection and the calamity that comes in the wake of this loss. The calamity that comes in the wake of this loss. And then Liu goes on to say, even the assassination of the Archduke Francis Ferdinand at Sarajevo, the event that precipitated World War I, took place on the 9th day of the month of Av. While this was not a specifically Jewish calamity, some historians see it as the precipitating event of the Holocaust. And hence, he says, the 9th of Av is a time when we are reminded that catastrophes will keep recurring in our lives until we get things right, until we learn what we need to learn from them. The Jewish high holidays of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur have a lot to do with making apologies and granting forgiveness, both within ourselves and with others, and clearing the slate for the year to come. But such a journey of reckoning needs to begin by taking a full account of what is on the slate in the first place. In order to turn toward being in better relationship with one another, we need to take account of what is less than ideal, what alienation we might feel, what estrangement we might feel, what could use some healing in our lives. I mentioned that if we don't address things that are coming up, they will continue to come up. Our ability to make a different choice, to blaze a new trail, to dig a new groove in our habitual way of being is dependent on our ability to encounter the same circumstance again and to make a different choice. And in order to do that, it's hugely helpful to take a full account of whatever is uncomfortable that's there for us. Any action, any change that we might make can only come from one source: our own choices. I talked a few minutes ago about how many ways there are to distract ourselves, but there's additionally another way that I didn't mention, one that predates all social media and the internet and the whole attention economy, that of blaming others for our circumstances. And I want to clearly affirm that others can cause harm in our lives. That happens a whole heck of a lot, as all of us know. But ultimately, their actions are out of our control. They are a realm over which we have zero agency. And our own responses, our own choices of what we do, are a place where we have a great deal of choice. Fred Luskin, who runs the Forgiveness Center at Stanford University, has this great metaphor about forgiveness where he talks about when we don't forgive, it's sort of like if we were a police officer sitting in our car on the side of the road writing tickets to people without ever starting up our engine. Or if our engine was broken and we weren't actually able to give anybody the tickets and we're still there just writing them. We're very good. My psychology is really great at coming up with all the things that other people should be doing better or could be doing better. But when I focus on that, it doesn't get me very far. And when I'm looping on an argument in my own head and thinking through all the wonderful lawyer show things that I could say in response or should have said in response in the past or could if they said this thing to me, I'm distracting myself from the actual choices that I can make. I'm holding on to something that is preventing me from moving forward. Psychologically, our brains are just very good at justifying our own perspectives, at crafting stories we tell ourselves about how we're right to fight like hell about this thing or avoid what is uncomfortable or make ourselves smaller and to not so that we don't upset how things are going. And in addition to pretending that things are okay and blaming others for things that not being okay, there's another path that some people choose, and that's the path of apathy. In the words of theologian Dorothy Soel, apathy is a form of the inability to suffer. It is understood as a social condition in which people are so dominated by the goal of avoiding suffering that it becomes a goal to avoid relationships and contacts altogether. My invitation to you this Sunday is to let go of these things, to allow that which is uncomfortable for you to be perceived and experienced in its fullness. Whether that's relationship dynamics or patterns in your own life or little bits of suffering that you pick up along the way. As we prepare for this season of renewal, what brush needs to be cleared away for new growth to occur? Just as the days have gotten longer and longer for months and months, and now even as they shorten, we still bask in the summer warmth and cooler days are on the horizon, just as the year has already begun to let go. Of what will you let go? Rabbi Liu writes about a woman in his congregation who poured all of her life's energy into creating the perfect family. She had 3 children, each one more talented and brilliant than the next. The eldest was a boy, bright, handsome, and gifted musician. She often had him play the trumpet for her dinner guests, and he often sang duets with his younger sister, the middle child, an adorable one. They sang these songs from South Pacific, and the woman herself was brilliant and beautiful, and she was extremely ambitious, and she had come from a very poor background and had suffered disgrace and ostracism as a child. But now her husband was a successful doctor, and her children were too good to be true. She was the envy of everyone and soon became the center of an increasingly prestigious succession of social circles. Her husband acquired famous patients, and she began to socialize with them. And her first 2 children were accepted at Ivy League universities. And none of this happened by accident. She made it happen. Her husband had wanted to begin his practice in a comfortable rural community. He might have had a nice living there, but he would have been a non-entity if she hadn't insisted that he practice in a major urban center instead. And the children required constant prodding, constant pushing, constant reminding that their success and failure were a reflection on her. She was beautiful and generous, but she had a very sharp edge. And then her son, the bright, handsome musician, had a major breakdown. He came home from college and curled up on his bed in the fetal position. And when people came to visit, they asked about him and wondered why he never came out. His mother would turn beet red then, but it was far worse when he did come out. Always a quiet and rail-thin blonde, he was now coarse, and he would sit in the living room in a funk, insulting his mother's visitors, several times driving them from the house, and this went on for years. There was a seemingly endless succession of psychiatrists and mental institutions and tawdry apartments and weird encounters with strangers on the streets, desperate trips to Europe and the Caribbean, and in between, he would always come home, and he would lie on his bed in the fetal position, and he would sit in the living room and insult his mother's friends. His mother was devastated. Her ascent up the ladder of social success came to a complete halt. Life became a humiliation for her. Social visits became a nightmare. Either there was the heavy presence of her absent son emanating from the bedroom, or her son's actual presence, coarse and angry. And then, of course, there was her son's suffering. Above and beyond the social implications of all of this was the fact that she really did love her son desperately, and her son appeared to be dying of misery, and she felt the walls of her world falling down around her. And then, after 3 or 4 years, the misery ended as suddenly and mysteriously as it had begun. The son met a young woman, and they fell in love, and they married and had 3 children, and his life regulated itself in almost every way. There was almost no trace of those years of near madness and rage, and when the smoke had cleared, it was apparent to everyone that there was no trace of his mother's hard edge before, no trace of her social ambitions. Her son's nightmare and his sudden, inexplicable recovery from it had softened her. The walls of her ego had crumbled. Her son had torn them down. But everyone who knew her agreed. She was the better for it. She was warmer. She was softer. She had a deeper sense of what was important in her life. That's one particular story with one particular arc with a bunch of family dynamics in it, which probably looks very different in many respects from anything that's going on in many of your lives. But it articulates one possible clearing away of brush. This is the time of year that some parts of the world naturally experience forest fires, and that clearing away of brush allows new life to emerge. Many who have experienced the loss of a spouse and then found love again could tell you of how important it was to feel their heartbreak, to hold the fullness of that within their being for a time in order to find new life afterwards. So my invitation to you this Sunday is to allow a new degree of honesty with yourself. In the words of the poet David White, where we cannot go in our mind, our memory, or our body is where we cannot be straight with one another, with the world, with ourselves. The fear of loss in one form or another is the motivator behind all conscious and unconscious dishonesties. All of us are afraid of loss in all its forms. All of us at times are haunted or overwhelmed by the possibility of a disappearance. And all of us, therefore, are one short step away from dishonesty. Every human being dwells intimately close to a door of revelation they are afraid to pass through. Honesty lies in understanding our close and necessary relationship with not wanting to hear the truth. He continues, honesty is a robust incarnation to the unknown, unfolding vulnerability of existence, where we acknowledge how powerless we feel, how little we actually know, how afraid we are of not knowing, and how astonished we are by the generous measure of loss that is conferred upon even the most average life. And finally, he writes, honesty is grounded in admitting exactly how powerless we are. Honesty is found in understanding how deeply afraid of it we are. To become honest is, in effect, to become fully and robustly incarnated into powerlessness. Honesty is the outer diagnostic of our ability to come to ground in the living, breathing frontier where there is no realistic choice between gain and loss. To come back to even experiences of suffering, to be able to find the nourishment in them, to be able to say about that nourishment, this is good. It can be a very scary thing to be able to let go to that degree. But I hope you know that I am here. You have a minister. I can respond. I will respond. I am invested in your facing whatever it is that is there for you. And so over this coming week, my invitation, my homework to you, I'm going to list off a series of questions, and it's a bunch of different ways of getting at the same thing. And so whichever one fits for you, hold on to that, let the other ones fall away. You can pick whichever is most meaningful to you. I just want to invite you into a number of different ways of noticing what comes up for you in the moments of stillness. There's no need to dig super deep into any of these. It could just be what pops up in those little gaps of time between your paying attention to one thing and you're paying attention to another thing. But what do you notice is falling away in your life? What brush needs to be cleared in order for new growth to occur? From what suffering have you been distracting yourself? In what ways have you been dishonest with yourself? What tug do you feel just under the surface? Or maybe you've experienced some big loss in recent years that you're still carrying around. In what ways could you make space for that? In what ways could you make more space for that to be? May we prepare ourselves to enter the storehouses of the snow, to see the treasuries of the hail, to experience the frozen face of the deep, to say yes to life and truth and love with all the pain and hope and dreaming and dark and disappointment and loving that life entails. Committed to finding the nourishing, but not necessarily tasty, good within all of it. Having faith that we can relax into the love and peace and blessing of existence, the all of life that is a gift, which we are called to use. May we learn to use that gift ever more gracefully and skillfully. May it ever be so. Amen.
So, excuse me, now is the time in our service for our offering. We give to remind ourselves of how many gifts we have to offer. We give to remember that we are part of something bigger than ourselves. We give because we believe in music and friendship. We give with the faith that together we have enough. The money in the baskets goes to sustaining the mission of our community. The money in the cups goes to our Faith in Action ministry and a different charity chosen by the ministry every month. This month, the money from the cups goes to the Family Giving Project.
The Chicago Abortion Fund?
I'm sorry, what, Cindy?
Chicago Abortion.
Oh, okay. I think the order of service said Family Giving Project, but okay. This money in the cups goes to the Chicago Abortion Fund, and maybe, I think, Pete, you spoke about that last week? Or Cindy did, okay. For those not here with us today, there is an online link on the screen for both one-time and regular donations. Could I please have 4 volunteers to come forward to carry the baskets and cups?
Closing words this morning by Mary Oliver. To live in this world, you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes to let it go, to let it go.